Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This afternoon, our focus is going to be on the skills revolution. And we're going to start by looking at the journey of the individual learners themselves, the learners as unique individuals at the beginning, at the start of their own upskilling and learning journey. We're going to explore together what are the challenges that adult educators find when they want to motivate and support adult learners? What are the creative ways that they can find to overcome some of these challenges? Just to give you another reminder that the way you interact with us, if you want to put questions or comments to the speakers, you need to be using the EPALE platform, and you need to be registered to log in. We already have a community of 120,000 users, and we're happy to have more. So please join, and then you can interact with us. We also have are live on a number of social networks, and we would like you to use the hashtag #ImagineEPALE. That's the red thread going through our community conference, which is the 3-day event. We want you to imagine a new way forward, and you can send us whatever sparks your imagination. You can send us photos, drawings, doodles. You can send us texts. You can send us word notes. Whatever you want to share with us is exciting for us to understand what sparks your imagination and your role as an adult educator. So that's how you can interact with us. We're going to start our session this afternoon with an absolutely amazing keynote speaker. And I'm delighted that we're going to be joined by Dr. Fabrice Jaumont. Now, he's an expert in looking at the issue of bilingualism and multilingualism. And we're going to explore together what that means, what that has as an impact on your cognitive development, and why it's a good thing and we should be encouraging it more widely, why bilingualism should be part of the core identity of the new way forward for adult learning. So welcome, Dr. Jaumont, and thank you for joining us from across the pond at the moment in the United States. So thank you for taking the time. Let me just ask you, your first book is entitled The Bilingual Revolution, and this whole session is called The Skills Revolution, and that's a lot of revolutions. So why do we need one?
Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be joining you from Washington D.C. On a chilly morning, and it's important to Washington D.C. to be talking about revolutions. I come here quite often actually to advocate for bilingual education and for the importance of our languages. I myself, as you said, wrote this book called The Bilingual Revolution because I was a bit fed up by the way education was going in this country, but I think it relates also to what's going on in Europe. There's a famous speaker I used to quote him quite a lot. He says that monolingualism is the illiteracy of the 21st century, and I quite agree with him. His name is Greg Roberts. And wherever I go, I look around schools, school systems, education systems, and I see very monolingual ways of schooling our children, of investing in our future. And I like the theme of your conference, which is really about revolution skills and also imagining our future. So for me, there cannot be a future with just one language being shared with our children. It's got to be a bilingual future, a multilingual future. And for that, we need to do several things. We need to, first of all, recognize our linguistic diversity and engage with our communities, embrace their cultures, their language, promote this linguistic heritage, and also make sure that schools understand what families want, and respect their differences, respect their needs also. So that's what I'm trying to imagine. It's a bilingual future, trying to change the mindset of schools, of institutions, of families, and of our countries in general.
Thank you. And it's certainly a bold vision and something that is at home in the European Union because there's an official policy to promote multilingualism and to encourage that. In your latest book, it's called Conversations on Bilingualism, and it collects interviews that you had with different experts on this subject. So perhaps we could start by trying to define what is a bilingual or multilingual person.
Thank you. Yes, it's important to define things like that because there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of myth around what bilingualism is. but I always like to start by saying what bilingualism is not, and just to clear a few misconceptions. First of all, bilingualism and being bilingual is not a problem. It's not something that we should treat as a problem or that we should try to solve. And school systems in particular, should try to focus on integrating bilinguals as opposed to segregating them or you know removing that language that they bring into schools and just making them monolinguals. The other thing I want to say is that being bilingual does not hurt a child's IQ, or it will not slow down the child's vocabulary or anything like that. It's actually quite the opposite. And it's not, it's a big deal to be bilingual. It's something that needs to be recognized. And I know many of your viewers today are probably bilinguals or speaking more than one language. And it's a big deal. It's not a superfluous thing. It's also not a privilege. It doesn't have to cost money to educate your children in more than one language. This should be done everywhere, and in public schools in particular. And one more thing is that being bilingual is not and should not be taboo for immigrant families when they're coming from different countries. They should not be afraid of speaking their language to their children when they go to the supermarket or on the street. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things going on, and in the United States in particular, when people get assaulted for speaking their language, which is not English. They get harassed for that, and this needs to stop. We need to be able to really recognize and accept this multilingualism. And quickly, for a definition, for me, there's only one simple definition of what a bilingual is. It's really someone who speaks or uses a language or two languages on a regular basis. And as long as this is a back and forth between two languages um, on a regular basis, that defines you as a bilingual. And for that, for all the things I said, I really think that being bilingual should be the new norm. All our children should be given the gift of language and be given the chance to become bilingual.
Thank you. So again, setting forward this idea that in the past, people have tended to look at bilingualism as somehow a problem, that it would act as a brake on development, that it adds some kind of extra cognitive load on the brain that somehow is unfortunate for children or for new immigrants to a community, that it was act as a brake on integration, and that it's something that it should get rid of. And you're putting it forward as actually no, as a celebration, as a means of integration and recognition of different cultures. One of the experts who you spoke to, François Grosjean, says that beyond just a linguistic capability, bilingualism is actually an identity in itself. What does that mean, and what would this new identity of bilingualism allow you to do or be differently?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning François Grosjean, who I admire greatly, and who has done so much, to advance our knowledge on bilingualism. First of all, again, coming with a very American perspective on this topic, given the discriminations that many of immigrants are facing, uh, given issues of identity recognitions and identity formation, uh, bilingualism really establish pathways for understanding who we are, understanding where we come from, uh, you know, understanding each other better. So this is important. I myself raise two young daughters, and I want my daughters to be my daughters and speak French. I speak French at home. I want them to speak French to me and to my wife, and I want them to speak French to their grandparents who are back home in France. And a lot of families feel that need, that we want our children to be our children and retain this 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 not just this language, but all the culture that surrounds that language and the values that it brings. And for this, bilingualism is more than just language. It's connecting with with ourselves. It's connecting with our families, our roots. It's really connecting with our friends. It's building. It's big. It's building a group, building a community. So for all of this, it should definitely receive more of our attention and more of our investment. Also, bilingualism, again in the U.S. context, it's a way of resisting uniformization. Again, I talked about monolingualism, and to some extent, it's connected to uniformization. I'm not saying Americanization, although I could, but this is something from the past. If we're looking at the future, I really think that we should include more of our languages into this thinking and embrace this linguistic diversity, empower linguistic communities rather than oppress them. So that particular aspect touches on this notion of social justice. When you're migrating to another country, you should not erase your identity. You should not erase your linguistic heritage. On the contrary, you should be supported and it should be empowered. And for that, again, going back to my background in education, I really think that schools can play an important part. In particular, and this has been a big trend in the US with dual language education, bilingual education program in public schools, but also in private schools. This should be really looked upon very enthusiastically. Dual language education, when it's done well, when it's done for everyone, has a lot to bring. It's very inclusive, equitable. It provides access to language. It provides more than just that. It's also helping our kids understand or being more tolerant, being more friendly with others, and understanding the other's culture and where they're coming from. So this mutual understanding, this social cohesion, really is a good way to fight racism, to fight xenophobia or hate. So for me, bilingualism, and when we do this together as a society, is a good way to promote peace together.
Thank you, Fabrice. I'm wondering particularly about the fact there's a lot of focus in the US and some other countries on things like culture wars, where there's a considered, a right type of thinking and a left type of thinking. And I'm wondering if with bilingualism or multilingualism, there are some concepts that don't translate well from one language to another. And that forces you to think, there's a different sense of perspective, or there is a different way of looking at things. We had a speaker yesterday who talked about, indigenous communities have a much closer relationship to nature. So they believe that the earth communicates through them and with them. So this ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, that bridge of empathy that we talked about yesterday, when you've got situations of contested historical memories. I wonder if you might like to reflect on that, and that by being bilingual and thinking that there's another way of looking at things contributes to that plasticity of brain that's so important in problem solving.
Yeah, I agree, and it's true. Many researchers have written about this aspect of empathy within bilinguals. Bilinguals by 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 recognizing this different cultures, different languages that surround them, they're more understanding of those differences. And we talk a lot about social emotional learning, but I really think that bilingual education, in particular, encourages empathy, encourages problem solving as well, and increased control of attention, for instance. These are important skills, since we're talking about skills that we should look out and invest in a lot more. Particularly, if you think that bilinguals are great problem solvers as well as being having great empathy, I really think we're creating great citizens of the world, multilingual citizens of the world that are with this these extra skills, these extra powers.
So the superpowers then, the bilingual and
Two
multilingualism
powers
is,
of bilingual, yes.
yeah. Let me ask you this often, and you've spoken a lot about the importance of starting early, and it should be a human right for education to be in several languages, to have that opportunity. And it's certainly easier to learn a language when you're young. My kids, like yours, are in a bilingual setting. It's the opposite for me. We speak English at home; they're at school in French setting, and I see how easy it is for them. Um, and bilingualism tends to be a skill that people assume is something that you can only achieve if you start young. Can you, at other stages in your life, become bilingual? Is it a realistic expectation that people could pick up a skill enough to be, as you've defined it, able to regularly use it rather than order coffee in a cafe when they go on holiday to Spain?
Yeah, in my book Conversation Bilingualism, I interviewed two amazing researchers, Professor Ellen Bialystok and Professor Ana Ines Ensaldo. Both of them are in Canada, and there's a lot of great research done in Canada on bilingualism in particular. And these two have looked at older bilinguals and the impact of bilingualism on aging in particular. And again, can be language that you practice on a daily basis. That you don't have to be bilingual from birth to benefit from what they're saying are great advantages, in particular for your brain and the fact that this gymnastics that you do between two languages has a lot of advantages in the cognitive functions of your brain. It really protects you from a number of things, including the onset of diseases like Alzheimer in particular. So there are for sure many advantages in being bilingual, even at a longer on a longer lifespan. And for that, I really think that the fact that we're bilinguals can rewire the brain, make them better. It's almost like an insurance policy against brain decline. So the more you practice, and I think everyone in the room will relate to that. The more you practice your languages, the healthier you become. So being bilingual makes you better whenever you're acquiring the skills. So I can only encourage you to keep practicing, keep sharing your language with your family throughout your life.
Thank you, Fabrice. I wonder if there's any research that tells us about the impact of bilingualism when the languages are similar, like the Romance languages or the Anglo-Saxon languages, or if you have two very different languages. Let's say you've got Japanese and French. Do we have any information about that? If that makes life easier or more complex, or is the research sort of generally on one, two, or more languages? It doesn't matter what they are; the benefits are equal depending on whichever the languages are from.
I think the research on the brain is similar, whatever the language you're speaking. It's what's happening on these parts of your brain which matters. The fact that you're creating a stronger muscle. We can say the brain is a muscle, and that is really what matters. Whatever the languages you're juggling with.
Yeah. Um, when you interviewed all these different experts for your book, I wonder if there's any emerging insight that you found particularly surprising or unusual.
Well, there are always things that amaze me. In particular, when you know that bilingual students will outperform monolingual students on certain standardized school tests. And these are tests that are not designed for bilinguals, they're designed for monolinguals, whether it's in math or language arts. And it's the researchers have demonstrated that bilinguals perform better on tests and as early as you're 5, 6, young kids in primary schools get better results, and sometimes even in math, and that's what's wonderful. Just by this constant back and forth between languages, it's a fascinating a fascinating field as far as research is concerned.
I think also particularly interested in expressing some conversation about the idea that it being bilingual or multilingual is actually a positive benefit for health. You mentioned the slowdown and cognitive decline that happens in older years, but I think this is really interesting to explore that this is almost when we talk in health, we talk about the importance of prevention and about lifestyle issues, and that's all about whether you move, what you eat, whether you drink, whether you smoke. But here we're actually talking about learning a language as an early investment in prevention of cognitive difficulties. That seems to me a really interesting insight.
Yes, and again, if we see and consider bilingualism as a matter of public health, it changes everything. Because that's the one of the misconceptions is that bilingualism or bilingual education is about learning languages, and that's it. Just another way to learn language. But if we think about it, it's not at all, or it's not just that. If it's really to make healthier, smarter citizens, then we should do this in every school, in every country.
We've had a question from Federico, which I think is interesting. He says, thanks for this deep dive into the fascinating topic. I was wondering whether you could say something about sign language. Can we consider someone bilingual if they know a spoken language and a sign language? So they're using, if you like, a different part of the brain. They're using the motor cortex as well as the language processing area. Is that bilingual? Do you get the same benefits?
Absolutely. And there are dual language programs with sign languages in the US. So you can go to a school in a dual language program. One of the languages is sign language. And I think that's something that is very important. So yes, absolutely, you're right.
I wonder if, going back to the conversation about the idea of bilingualism being an identity, I know that, for example, I use my hands a lot when I speak, but I have Italian friends who they literally could not speak without their hands. And I'm wondering if, as part of your identity, people who are bilingual, multilingual, often their tonality of their voice changes, their hand gestures, the speed that they speak in changes as they take on the identity in the language that they speak to. So I think it's quite interesting to see that a language isn't just a language; it's a culture, it's a history, an emotional framework within which people operate.
And it gives us a richer life when you think about it. Now you have two languages, two ways of looking at the world, two ways of expressing yourself, two ways of appreciating things around you. So I really think we live a richer life being multilinguals, and we should definitely not try to squander that wealth. That
Fabrice, I mean, you talk about just how much a great benefit being bilingual is, and from a personal perspective. But I wonder if you could reflect a little bit for companies if they're looking for their workforce. And we know that amongst the top skills that companies are looking for is creativity, agility, flexibility, and those sound to me all the kinds of qualities that you've identified as a bilingual person. Do you think that means that companies should be offering language classes? Should it be part of the well-being they invest in for their employees?
Yes, that's a great suggestion. I'm also adding to this that there are many more jobs now available out there requiring multilingualism. So if you're a student and looking for a job, it's actually something to put forth on your resume. But for sure, this is a great idea. We should definitely have more access to language learning, and why not do it at work? Definitely, good idea.
Is there anything that we know about the way that we acquire a language? Because I've seen some research to show that in order to really immerse yourself in a language and learn it well, you need interaction with another human being, and that you can learn languages with apps and other things. But the thing that actually takes you into being able to understand a language and use it effectively is that connection with human beings. So if we think that it's a good thing that we upskill everyone with languages and we start encourage people to use apps and electronic programs, is that going to deliver the kinds of benefits that true bilingualism will offer?
It's a good question, particularly with the emergence of AI and other devices. I'm looking at also what's going on with the meta world, and all of us wearing not headsets, but all these parallel lives that we're going to live. Are these going to be good for language learning and the ability to communicate with others in other languages? This is something I would love to explore more. We need other humans, that's for sure. We need each other uh, to make that possible. So I'm curious to see, and I'm hoping to discuss this further with all of you, whether the metaverse will be good for our bilingualism, multilingualism in the next few years, and if we will find new spaces to communicate in different languages.
Do you have a view on made up languages? So, if you're a fan of Star Trek, people who go to Star Trek conventions, they speak Klingon. People who are interested in Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, they learn to speak Elvish. Does is it the process of learning that provides the benefit? In other words, no matter what language they've learned, even if it's a made up one, they get the benefits. Or is it really because it's a bridge to other human beings, it needs to be a living language?
I think the first thing is having fun doing it. And there's got to be some sort of pleasure learning a language and using that language and then using it a lot regularly, then to get some of the benefits of what we discussed earlier. But that notion of pleasure, even for children, think again of parents trying to transmit their language to their children. It has to be fun. It has to make sense. It has to be meaningful and pleasurable. And that's where things begins. That's why kids will learn a lot more from other kids sometimes just by playing, and the role of play is really important. So whether it's Star Trek that gets you interested, whether it's another approach, it's all good. It's all good. But again, to reap the benefits, we need to do this every day as regularly as possible and in all kinds of situations.
Thank you. And one final question. People talk about it when we talk about moving it into a digital future. People talk about programming languages, and they actually use that word language, that they do Python or something else to this ability to think in and code in a different structure than the grammatical one that you use to speak in. Does that have that same benefits, or is it actually, because it's not used for virtual communication exchange, it doesn't have that same deep effects on the brain?
Yeah, that's a good question. Can you have a conversation in Python? I don't know. I don't know enough about this. But again, I, I don't want to discourage anyone from learning coding or anything like that. Some people here in the US say, forget languages, teach them coding instead. And sometimes they say because that's a language. I'm a bit perplexed with regards to that, and I don't know if this will reap any of the benefits of bilingualism for sure. But why not? I don't want to discourage anyone. Again, we need coders. We need that other set of languages that programming is about. Yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you. I mean, I think you've made the point. It's the process of learning that's important. But when it's a language, it brings you all of these additional benefits around culture, around geography, around history, about genealogy, about communicating and bridging divides. And I'm going to bring our conversation to a conclusion with a comment that we've had from the audience that I think is great. That says language learning as a tool to promote mutual understanding and peace, and therefore we should definitely invest more resources. And at a
Definitely.
time when we have war on literally on the borders of the European Union and back in the European continent for the first time in generations, I think we can only echo this message that languages give you the ability to understand someone, to create that connection, and to build a connected story, which is something that we need so much.
And to create more peace, and we need
Create more
this.
peace. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Fabrice, for
Thank
spending some
you.
time with us and inspiring us. I hope to all go away and practice the languages we already know and perhaps start learning other ones because of the positive impact on health and keep us active in our mental acuity in old age. So thank you very much, Fabrice, for joining us
Merci.
this afternoon. Thank you. So now we're going to move to a panel, and we've got some really wonderful people who are going to share with us to discuss the next level in this. And we now let me introduce. I have Wilma Greco, I have Elena Zenemos, Puk Vita, and Diana Spiridon. And let me tell you what all of their expertise is, so that we can get into it. And we just talked about the power of language to unite, to grow, to change, and how it's connected into our identities, our geographies, and our histories. Now we're going to be talking about how we empower all adults to regularly take up learning opportunities. And Fabrice said it's never too late to learn. Of course, it's great when kids start learning, but you can add a language or a skill at any stage in your life. So Wilma Greco is a teacher and volunteer at the Casa Circondara d'Aralia, which is a prison in Sicily. Elena is a project manager at the Center for Social Innovation in Cyprus. Puk is a consultant at Sardes, which is a project-based agency for consultancy, project coordination, and research and development in education. And Diana Spiridon is a team leader in the Skills Agenda Unit for DG Employment, Social Affairs, and Inclusion at the European Commission. So this is our panel of experts. And as usual, you, the audience, have a role to play. Please put your comments and your questions so that we can get to that later. I'm going to start perhaps by inviting Diana to set the scene for us. It's a skills revolution is our topic for this afternoon. We know that there's a skills agenda at EU level. We've heard that our event was opened yesterday by your colleagues from the Commission, who talked about the skills mismatch and how important it is to update and engage with that. So Diana, tell us the perspective from the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Tamsin, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this panel. And indeed, I'd be happy to really set the scene for the discussion. So to address today's challenges and opportunities, adapting one's skills throughout life has become an imperative. Possessing the right skill set is really crucial to fair growth, to a thriving economy, which really grasps the opportunities of the digital and green transitions, and of course, to an inclusive society which leaves no one behind. So as also the title of this panel is Skills Revolution, indeed, we need a skills revolution that makes participation in training the new normal, and it should be no longer the exception, but the norm. However, we see that the participation of adults in training over the last decades has not really kept up with the scale of the challenge. And for instance, last year in the Social Summit in Porto, the EU leaders agreed to give, let's say, even more importance to the issue of skills development. So they really agreed on 3 targets at EU level for joint action until 2030, and one of them is particularly dedicated to increasing skills and participation in learning. So that is that by 2030, at least 60% of adults should participate in learning every year. And basically putting into action the first principle of the European social pillar, that really everyone has the right to quality and inclusive education, training, and lifelong learning. So to achieve this headline target, learning anytime, anywhere should be really strongly encouraged, and increasing participation of the low qualified and the underrepresented groups is crucial. And reaching the hard to reach really requires nudging them into learning in a way that is appealing, inspiring, and non-threatening. So now, to facilitate the increase of adult participation in learning at EU level, we have a number of policy initiatives. So to start with, as you rightly said, Tamsin, the European Skills Agenda. So this is our 5-year plan for skills development, which was set out in July 2020 as our, let's call it policy compass. So it identifies skills as a driver of the green and digital transition, as well as for inclusiveness for everyone in Europe. One of the actions of the skills agenda is the Council recommendation on individual learning accounts, which basically should empower all individuals to take up training. At the center of the recommendation, we have the individual learning account, which is a personal account for training entitlements. this is because, let's say, such an account allows for the accumulation and transfer of entitlements. So giving the individuals really ownership of their training entitlements and ensuring that they can use, let's say, whenever it's needed most, be it for transitions, from job to job, during periods of unemployment or inactivity, or in periods of short time work, such as the COVID period, where the time off, let's say, could be used to develop the skills needed for a swift recovery. However, this does not mean that all adults need the same amount of support. So a first principle of the recommendation is that the one of universal but differentiated support, where basically adults with, let's say, additional training needs would receive additional support. Now, the individual learning accounts would be embedded let's, as we call it, in an enabling framework, which includes, of course, very importantly, elements such guidance and skills validation opportunities or paid training leave, for instance. Another action of the skills agenda, which is equally interesting and relevant, is the council recommendation on micro-credentials. These micro-credentials are, let's say, small targeted qualifications that can support, let's say, the flexible upskilling and reskilling needed to very often quickly just meet new and emerging needs. So they are therefore the ideal tool to certify continuing training, which usually takes the form of let's say, short courses and aimed at let's say, specific skills needs. Now, just a few words very briefly on another important initiative that we have in the skills agenda, that is the Pact for Skills. So this initiative aims to mobilize, private and public stakeholders to really take concrete action for upskilling and reskilling of people of working age. So this can be done either as individual members of the Pact or as, let's say, part of large-scale partnerships that are basically established in the key European industrial ecosystems. And some of these partnerships have an inclusion dimension. For example, the partnership in the proximity and social economy, which includes among its objectives like increasing the number of vulnerable people upskilled or reskilled within the social economy. Also, a number of individual members in the pact, let's say, target more vulnerable people and the hardest to reach. For instance, we have a few examples from Italy, from Greece, from Lithuania, from Romania. And now, let's say, I'm close to concluding. So if we detach a bit from the skills agenda, I would just like to say a few words about another very important policy document at EU level, the Council resolution on a new European agenda for adult learning, covering this decade, so from 2021 up to 2030, which basically, let's say, outlines, a vision of how adult learning should develop by 2030, and which has a few, main priority areas, as we call them. So the governance of adult learning, of course, the supply and take-up of lifelong learning opportunities, accessibility and flexibility, quality, inclusion in adult learning, and last but not least, the green and digital transition. And just before I stop, I would just want to recall another very important policy initiative, as we say, really for our joint work on making sure that no one is left behind. That is the Council recommendation on upskilling pathways. You know that it was adopted at the end of 2016, which basically aims at ensuring that adults have the opportunity to develop their basic skills, so literacy, numeracy, and digital skills, and further widen their skill set. So this is, let's say, in a nutshell, an overview of the main policy initiatives at EU level, aiming, as we said, really supporting adults to engage in training, but at the same time also giving particular attention to those adults that, let's say, need more support to engage in training. So thank you.
I'm sorry. It appears that My microphone wasn't on. Thank you, Diana, for sharing the perspective from the EU and getting a sense of the history of how the skills agenda has developed and how it's moving forward. And I particularly liked, and I noted it down, universal but differentiated support. So people get the kind of support they need. So meeting the learner wherever they are in that journey. So thank you very much, Diana. And I'm now going to turn to Wilma because
Yeah.
you work with people in prison. And that's obviously a very special, specific environment. What, for people in prison, what has been their experience of education and what are the special characteristics of working with this population?
Yes, good afternoon. And first of all, thanks to EPALE for this important opportunity to share experiences. As for your question, I have to say that a large number of adult mates come from early school living. They belong to vulnerable groups and have little motivation to learn or at least to study, as a prison is a prison that swallows up everything else and make it very difficult to imagine any kind of future. But when the teacher manages to spark motivation, that's it. Studying becomes also time for self-care, for a suffering that finds similarities or differences in the difficulties, in the storms of life experienced by people belonging to different eras, spaces, and cultures, discovering the humanity that unites us all, good and bad. It one can be only good or only bad. And then I have to say that work in prison is a task that faces many difficulties. The particular and the contradictory dynamics of the adult students, as already said, but also the poverty of the means available. We get by with photocopies, chalks, and a traditional blackboard on the walls in cells used as classrooms. Furthermore, the results achieved in the short term are very, very few and often not very significant. So at times I ask myself, but what is the real purpose of my work? So the day after, I find the answer. The answer is that I open doors and I can feel the satisfaction of being able to stimulate the learning skills of the inmates, helping them to prepare for their future freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilma. You've just mentioned the word freedom, which I think is so important because your work gives people in prison the freedom to express themselves through writing stories or drawings or even food recipes. How does this freedom transform their lives?
Well, we are now speaking about non-formal education, while before we were talking about formal education, and this refers most of all to my work as a volunteer in charge of cultural activities. I think that creativity and artistic production in prison, such as writing, drawing, including autobiography, or also inventing food recipes, represent for the mate the ability to project himself beyond the bars on the doors or on the windows, accepting a great challenge, the challenge of putting beauty back into circulation. The beauty that they, the guilty people, denied their victim, denied society, and denied themselves. This is not only a skills revolution, but also the opportunity to give meaning to one's experience, transforming it into learning opportunities where potentialities and skills never explored are used. Actually, while the mate makes his choices or seeks solutions for the work he is creating, at the same time he finds solutions for facing both the difficulties of his everyday prison life and of his own past history, perhaps reviewing it with a critical attitude and understanding his mistakes, and this can really transform his life. Some years ago, we decided together, me and my mates, to join the competition proposed by various associations, such as the Artisti Dentro. We can say in English, artists inside, where inside is the prison, of course. A competition aimed at giving voice to the inmates from prisons all over Italy. I would like to explain better this project of Artisti Dentro. I usually meet the inmates individually or in groups. I present the three sections of the competition, leaving them to express themselves through writing stories or drawing or inventing recipes. The competition is like a bridge between them and the society free outside. Thanks to the book printed when the competition is over. And this is very important because the inmate can see his name in a real book, regaining a little of his dignity. As regards the food recipes, they tell of how in prison it is possible to cook a very complicated dish using things like a camping stove, pot lids, and plastic cutlery. The stories told in the form of poetry or short stories are always surprising when I consider that many of the inmates try their hand at writing for the first time and without much preparatory education. Or many of them are very shy, like me, when it comes to talking. We do, in fact, discuss a lot about the role of words that can be windows or walls, depending on how they are used. Furthermore, writing is a way to regain a space and an identity in the penitentiary institution that tends to cancel it. It is a way of considering our life as a work in progress. If someone else is looking at it from the outside, a way to survive in a dehumanizing environment, stop and start again towards freedom. Finally, the most original section is the mail art competition using the postal service. The inmate's postcard will be subject to unpredictable events, such as the weather or the way it is stamped. And the risk is that by the time it arrives, the postcard could be different from the way it started, perhaps better, just like the inmates themselves. We often win competitions with cash prizes that give substance to my promise of beauty, and it's an incentive to go on. While inmates increase self-esteem, I am really gratified in my role as an educator who believes that the most beautiful flowers grow in the most desolated lands. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such a powerful story that you shared with us, Wilma. And if you ever wondered what it is you're doing in there, because it feels like the academic progress is slow, you have just described for us how wonderfully you can offer the inmates in the prison an opportunity to imagine and create something different. And I love the idea that words can be windows or walls. That's a really powerful message. So thank you very much, Wilma, for sharing your experience. And if people are interested, they can go to the EPALE community stories and read more about what you've been doing and share it. Puck, let me invite you in because your organization targets adults with low literacy levels. How has an innovative approach, so experts by experience, how has that made a difference in the way you work?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think experts by experience are the best people to find new learners, to stimulate them to start learning, because they know what it is. They know what it is to be low literated, to feel the shame to not be able to read well. They know the negative experience most low literate people have, and they have a success story to share, and that will stimulate other people. So the foundation I did this project for, that's not my own employer, but it's the foundation ABC, and it's run by voluntaries. And most of them are low literate themselves, or they used to be low literate. So for them, it's not innovative to use that power, but because they're 25 years now, but they want to share this great experience they have. And I think they'll manage to do that, because in the Netherlands, more organizations are realizing that we should listen to these experts when we want to lower the amount of low literate people. So that's a good thing, but unfortunately, it's hard to find enough experts by experience. And in this project, we wanted to increase the amount by starting, well, what we call embassies for language ambassadors, another term for the experts by experience. We wanted to start 14 of these embassies, and well, it was Corona time, so it was hard. I'll talk about that later. But we managed to start 14 of these places. And well, so we have now 12 municipalities where we have yes, kind of network of these experts and 2 organizations. So we bring these experts by experience closer to local communities to, yeah, they do their great work. And I'm not sure what it's the effects already, but we know from the past 25 years that it's very it makes impact to do it like this. And we also encourage people to talk with the educators about the form. And the former talks were about differentiating, making education that forms around people, and that's why that's what the experts also are very great at, to share their experiences, also to make the education more powerful.
Can you perhaps tell us a little bit more? What do you mean by expert by experience? Because I don't think the concepts come through very strongly. Yeah. Who or what is an expert by experience?
Yeah, it's a term we use for the people who were low literate themselves before they start learning. They took lessons, and I met some people who were hardly able to read before, and now they love books. So they make a great progress in reading in this. But it's also more about basic skills, so computer skills, math skills, but mostly reading and writing is the main issue.
So people who started their learning journey right at the very beginning at quite low levels, but have moved through and have been through the pain of going through learning and have now found a new passion and a joy and a freedom, and then they're now sharing that with others.
Yeah, they're sharing with professionals and with other low literate. So we have 4 roles we have made for them. It's to talk about what it is to be low literate, to professionals, to doctors, or well, all kind of professionals, but also to stimulate others to take learning. And they also test communication with us. So letters from the government, well, are they understandable? What can they do to make it more understandable?
Okay. Diana talked about, this idea that adult learning should be universal but differentiated, and what you've just described sounds like an extremely targeted approach. So what are the challenges of implementing it? It sounds it's so tailored, it's almost one-to-one to give people the skills and the pathways that they need. How do you make that happen?
Yeah. Well, the learning is still the formal education or informal, but it's more the way to find the new learners. That is very targeted indeed. Well, we think these experts need a house, a place where they are safe, where they get training to gain the skills to fulfill the
Confidence.
task. Yeah, and we thought it must be personal, it must be local, and that takes time, lots of time of people, and that's most difficult part maybe, to find people who are facilitated well with time, with money to do this job, to do it sustainable. People change jobs. We all do, but that's a drawback for the sustainability of this project, because when people change jobs, people have to build new relations, or the sense of urgency lowers with other people. So I think it needs to be sustainable and to be facilitated well to be a success. And what we learned in the Corona time, we are talking about people with low basic skills, so also low computer skills, and that's in Corona time another hard thing to deal with. But we learned a lot of that, so that's the that's positive side.
Great, thank you, Puck. Eleni, let me bring you in, because we're possibly facing a big economic crunch in Europe. We don't know how big or how bad it will be, but it may well trigger higher levels of unemployment. So how does upskilling and the whole skills revolution that we've been speaking about, how does that protect and increase their employment opportunities?
First of all, thank you for inviting me, and this is a great initiative, and I'm really happy to be here. So as it is already evident, not just the economic crisis in Europe, but also the fast advancements of technology, for example, they have had a major impact on unemployment, not just in Europe, of course, in all countries as well. So individuals nowadays cannot follow just a single career path like they used to back in the 70s or the 80s, or be experts in one area throughout their whole lives. As we've seen, a lot of occupations have already ceased to exist. For example, a lot of labor jobs, and a lot of people have already lost their jobs because of that. So it's essential for adults to keep improving their existing skills, and also, of course, to develop new ones. The more skills someone has, the wider the spectrum of jobs they can apply for. And of course, maybe they can remain in their own job and keep developing, because even if you're in one single environment, job environment for a while, you have to stay up to date with all the advancements. So of course, it's essential to be keep upgrading your skills and so on, especially though, because we touched upon it a lot, for the most vulnerable groups, because they are the most susceptible to unemployment as well. So for example, what we do at my organization, we have a lot of projects on targeting vulnerable groups, such as immigrants, women, low-skilled individuals, and so on. For example, we have a program on entrepreneurship for immigrant women. We have another one on how to teach your own language. So each will learn how to teach their own language and maybe teach each other, or in the future, they can become teachers themselves. So I would say it's essential to keep upskilling and also to reskill if necessary.
Thank you. Fabrice Jaumont, in his keynote speech a little bit earlier, talked about how the ability to speak other languages is a huge economic opportunity, because it makes you much more attractive to employers. It means you can work in a more diverse range of areas. In your community story on the EPALE platform, you highlighted that unemployed people often don't get access to professional English training, even though this is a skill that really could support their career prospects. So what are you trying to do about this? How are you trying to fix this challenge in a way that's accessible for people who are unemployed and can't normally get access to these things?
Great question. So the first thing I would say is we were surprised ourselves when we did the research, because obviously for all of these programs, we first do research in each country, that the only actually English training available is either through your employer, so it's paid by your employer, or you have to pay it for yourself. So therefore, a lot of adults who cannot afford that, they cannot do that. So what the specific program I shared the story with, which I was really happy about, was to produce a curriculum for teachers, but also 10 modules for adult learners, so they can improve their own professional English skills. And we produced 10 modules, starting from how to write your CV or a cover letter, on how to communicate professionally, etiquette, on how to read, write, and so on. So therefore, we produce something for free. I know that in some countries there are some schemes, but it's very limited. So one of the things we could do is actually to offer free training.
Thank you. We've got a question that was submitted by the audience, and I think, Eleni, you'd be exactly the right person to answer it, because Miguel Cordiero says, besides having platforms that are easy to use with quality content that targets the needs of the public, with micro courses, etc., why not engage the public with micro certificates that are generally accepted in large companies, etc., and maybe also with small rewards, financial or else? So, Eleni, what do you think about this idea that we should go out more broadly and offer the public little micro certificates of specific skills that would give them a direct financial benefit?
Definitely. I think what Diana mentioned at the beginning with the skills agenda and the micro credentials, that's the way forward. So to create pathways on getting micro credentials, recognized certificates, which will then count towards your employment prospects. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that's already on paper and is happening hopefully soon in the next maybe 10 years.
Diana, do you want to comment on this issue about, not just having micro credentials, but then micro certificates that are with much more uptake by large companies and maybe financial incentives to encourage people to take these on?
Yeah, surely this is indeed, that should be the future. And already, as I mentioned, already with these two council recommendations that we put forward on the micro credentials and individual learning accounts, this is exactly the idea to basically really allow and motivate, because very often we see that this is really a huge issue for adults to engage in training. Is really the motivation is also let's say putting aside the barriers that they have, very often financial barriers, or really simply not having the time to engage in learning. So basically, this is really the idea that we wanted to come forward and really allow them, again, recommend to the member states to really put in place these schemes, through which basically adults would have, let's say, access to financial entitlements. So basically, exactly these learning accounts, and then also giving them, let's say, the possibility to have the time to engage. And very important not to forget is that we really want to bring together all the, let's say, the stakeholders that are relevant for this world, let's say, for this policy area, to share the costs for adults training. And of course, here I very much refer, of course, of the employers. So it's not only an issue now that the employers have to really bear the costs. It should be really a cost sharing. So the public, the member states, of course, the employers, the let's say the social partners, can be also individuals themselves, because in some cases may also, they can also contribute to that if they really want to engage, for instance, in longer periods of training, but should be clearly a joint effort.
Thanks, Diana. Let me ask the panel something else. I'm going to ask Puck, Wilma, and Eleni the same question here, which is, we've been talking about how adult learning needs to be a mindset, a curiosity about learning for the future, something that motivates yourself. So can you tell us, in your respective areas of work, what you do to spark motivation, to encourage people to think about learning and taking on that task? Maybe, Puck, I can start with you, because at some point there were the people who had low literacy, so they've fallen out of the education at some point. How do you motivate them to get them to the point where the joy of learning has come back to their lives?
Yes. Well, I already told you, it's not me that's encouraged the people, it's the people themselves. And that's really the great part. It's the success story of someone who knows the situation, who has the same experience with formal education. And that makes, if I can do it, you can do it too. And then if they take a lesson and they see the increasing of their skills, the world opens when you start reading. And it's you can use your computer, you can use your smartphone, you can read with your grandchildren. From that moment, I think the mindset change is already is there for life, I guess. I can tell you the people I met in this project, the former low literate, they love learning now. So that really changed their lives, also in the mindset towards learning.
Thank you. Wilma, you shared in your example the book that's published of the art inside, and you explained the joy and the pride that someone can get when they see their name published in a book, and it gives them a motivation. You also described, how when they can write poems and other things, when they wrote food recipes that you could do on a camping stove and with plastic cutlery, how this gives them a pride in achieving something under difficult circumstances. Can you tell us a little bit more about your efforts like this, to encourage motivation and spark this idea of wanting to learn?
Well, I have to start from the reality in which I find myself, from the prison, of course, and from the inmates who are very complicated worlds, very complicated universes, as I have already said. Every time I have to negotiate a formative pact, trying to adapt my contents to the students, their attitude or competencies and skills. If I really want inmates to learn not only subjects like literature, math, or science, but above all, as you said, learn, to solve problems, to imagine possibilities other than the present ones, spaces of freedom beyond the limits they have always known in prison and outside as well. In my opinion, this is only possible by integrating formal and non-formal education, learning by doing activities with peer-to-peer learning or tutoring in the classroom, practicing to speak through other workshop forms, mixed to the methodology of a debate, just to name a few. But you said what's important is to transmit love for generative study, where generative thinking, where a problem gives rise to another broader question in a continuous striving for self-empowerment and lifelong learning. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilma. We've had a comment on Facebook that I think is worth showing, because somebody has said that giving hope and a future to those in prison, the most marginalized in society, defines the value of our coexistence among human beings. So thank you for that comment, Sandra. And I think that responds very much to what Wilma was saying, is offering hope, provides the value of all of our coexistence. So thank you for that. Eleni, what would you like to share about this specific issue about how do you create the learning to learn mindset, the passion for learning, which is what you need, the motivation to carry you through the difficult moments of acquiring a new skill? Because we shouldn't kid ourselves. It's not all automatically wonderful. You have to go through a bit where it's hard and you realize you don't know what you're doing, and then suddenly, oh, I do know what I'm doing. So how do you encourage people and create that motivation?
I think some of the points I wanted to mention, they have already been mentioned, but I guess it's worth repeating. I think using innovative teaching ways as well, like gamification, is one way forward, but also, as Wilma said, experiential learning by doing, mixing formal and non-formal education, because then you can actually see the benefits straight away. It's more engaging, it's more interesting. And then when you learn to love how to learn this way, then you want to learn more. It's not just sitting in front of a screen or a board and someone talks to you and then you have to learn that way, which is obviously now it's very outdated. So one of the ways forward is that. The other thing I would say is just, I know it's difficult, especially when you work with vulnerable groups, to motivate them. Why should I do the training? I don't have the time. I don't have the money, or so, it could be difficult for them. For example, simple things, logistics, like to get there. So making sure that all the training is inclusive and it can cover as many bases as possible. For example, it might be easier if it's online for some of them. For others, maybe they don't have a computer, so maybe organizing it in a classroom they can easily access, or people with disabilities. So I think it's very important to make sure that you cover all the vulnerable groups and the marginalized groups as well. But the way forward, I think, in all of them, which again is universal but differential, I think probably that's the motto of this session, is to make sure that the actual training is engaging and interactive, so they can come back, they want to come back themselves and keep learning.
Thank you, Eleni. We've had another question that's come in, and this is from Julia, and she says, how can we make learning so relevant that it can't be ignored or overshadowed by fears or lack of desire to learn? So I wonder if anyone from the panel wants to say, how do you, there's always a balance between, yes, I'm curious, I might want to do something, but I'm frightened. I don't want to make myself vulnerable. I don't want to expose myself to ridicule and others. How do you help with that balance to make learning so relevant, so attractive, so important that it outweighs some of these other fears? Puck, you're nodding, so I'm going to come to you first.
We had a nice, one of our networks started in Corona time, of course, and they were wondering how can we find people. And this was from a union, a labor union, and they asked all the members, well, do you, if your salary, how do you call that? Your salary?
Yeah, your salary.
Yeah, but it's the letter which will say all the taxes.
Okay.
And you know, these hard to understand things. I don't know the English word for it, but they asked different kind of questions about hard things around the organization of your work, and many people said, "Well, oh, this is hard, but this not well." And in this conversation, the whole word low literacy wasn't mentioned, but it was just speaking about hard things in relation to work, and then well, these troubles were subjects and. Now, after that, it was, oh, well, maybe we can help you with that. And so it wasn't just a message, go to the class, but from their own experiences, making a sense of urgency, which, and then the safe conditions, of course. Then you have to, well, bring them to the class or make the different, make the education that fits for them.
Thank you. And in fact, you've mentioned the word safety, and so far in our conversation, we've talked about the importance of making a safe house or a safe space for this to come to. And Wilma talked about spaces of freedom. So I think this is absolutely critical, isn't it? Is that people can only learn if it's a space that feels safe, that feels like there's freedom, that feels encouraging and attractive, and that is the key message here about a learning pathway. And I know we've got a comment that somebody's made about that it's a bit artificial to divide between formal and informal education, because lifelong learning is a pathway, it's a reality, and maybe we shouldn't be separating off this is formal and that's informal, but acknowledge that it's more of a continuum. As for our last few minutes of this session, I'd like to invite Diana back, because next year is something very special for the EU in linked to skills, and also maybe you can tell us what the EU is doing in preparation for what we know is going to be a hard winter, and we know there's possibly big economic impact coming. What's the Commission doing to prepare itself to make sure it can reach out to the hardest to reach, to make sure these ladders can be made to the most vulnerable so they can benefit from skills training?
Yes, indeed, Tamsin. So just yesterday, in fact, the Commission approved a number of proposals on how to curb energy price rises, and how to fund the bills for households and small businesses. So part of this, let's say, big energy package, as I said, adopted yesterday, it's also a redeployment of funds, of EU regional and structural funds that would free up some money, helping member states to, let's say, among others, also shelter vulnerable households and also the SMEs, from the energy price shock, and also to support short-time work schemes for the employees and the self-employed. So this is very important, and also in times of crisis, as I just mentioned, then let's say skilling becomes upskilling, reskilling becomes even more important. And maybe just, you know, my last word, I think indeed on, let's say, on last week's announcement from the European Commission President that the next year, so 2023, will be the European Year of Skills. So this is reflecting very much the importance that we as the Commission, and not only, in fact, are giving, let's say, to learning throughout life. So the year will focus on addressing skill shortages and the needs of companies and individuals to really develop the skills needed for now and for the future. So with the European Year of Skills, then the Commission proposes to also give a fresh impetus to lifelong learning. The objective of the year is to promote, as we heard so far already in the discussion, a mindset of upskilling, reskilling, irrespective of the employment status. It is about really helping people to get the right skills that, you know, can help them get and progress, let's say, in good quality work and support inclusion. But this should not be only an effort, let's say, of the Commission or of the institutions. This should be really a joint effort of all stakeholders, be it member states, be it, you know, regional, local authorities, social partners, public, private employment services, education and training providers, civil society, and the workers and companies all together. So again, maybe let's say my last word is really we rely on the expertise of the colleagues such as you know, my fellow panelists here and the whole EPALE community to inspire adults to take up training, upgrade their skills, and really get involved in the European Year of Skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana. And again, for that invitation for everyone to prepare by bringing their skills and their ideas for the Year of Skills next year. Wilma, would you like to say something as well?
I would like that everyone grow only if someone else dream him, and this is the involvement of the trainer with the learner. Without this, the training is empty. There is no motivation to learn. So I'm involved in the case. I dream for they made a different future, and I dream this with him.
Thank you. And in fact, we'd had a comment which had talked about being an involved trainer and said you have to be an involved trainer if you want to be engaging with your learners. And you've just described that so beautifully, Wilma, the ability to dream together with someone in prison about a new future for them. The trainers also have to be themselves daily learners and learn from all that they receive from their learners. And you've all, the members of the panel, have spoken about how you've also learnt something about the resilience of the communities that you work with. And there's a really very nice comment as well from Hakan, who said, thanks to adult education, first the adults' own lives and then the lives of those around them change positively. And again, I think this is where this is the special sauce, the magic ingredient of learning, that when it brings joy and freedom and creativity into someone's life and opens up new paths and opportunities, that the impact isn't just on the individual, it's on their friends, their families, the people around them, and they act as a source of inspiration and can take things forward. So thank you everyone for sharing all of these great messages. And I'd like to say a warm thank you to our panel, to Diana, to Puck, to Wilma, and to Eleni for sharing your ideas. On our topic today was the skills revolution, and you've described skills as both things that we can measure because they're needed for jobs, but also that less tangible, the impact it makes on people's mentalities and their lives. So thank you very much to Diana, Puck, to Wilma, and to Eleni.
Thank you.
My challenge, thank you all. My challenge now is to try and sum up a really full and very exciting day today. We started this morning by understanding the power of young people. We were looking at young adults, their energy, their enthusiasm, their commitment. And we heard the story from a young activist who has really changed the environment she works in. She's challenged taboos and she's developed this new outreach and engagement, working with children in rural areas, with migrants and others to really start new conversations. So our theme has been empowerment and agents of change. We talked again this morning with the panel, what do young people want? Their aspirations are different. They don't want a linear path for them set out. They want more meaningful engagement, opportunities to change the environment they're around them, and opportunities to input into big policy decisions that affect them. They want to be able to shape the environment they're in, not just have to have that environment impact on them. And this afternoon, we explored a little bit around the issue of bilingualism and multilingualism and the way that it magically rewires the brain and makes us automatically more open to different perspectives, different points of view, different cultural approaches. We explored how having an identity as a bilingual or multilingual person gives you both more opportunity to engage and work and live in different countries, but also a way of thinking that allows you a flexibility to move into new areas. We even heard the huge positive benefits it has on health in terms of the overcoming isolation and loneliness, particularly if you can maintain the languages of your community. We heard about it being an incredibly important preventive aspect for cognitive decline and diseases like Alzheimer's. And Europe is going to be the oldest continent in the world in 2030. So learning new languages is a wonderful public health intervention. And in this panel we've just finished, we explored more about the skills revolution. We talked about how communities that are most on the margins, most excluded, whether it's in prisons or low literacy and others, how they can be empowered, how tailored, specific, careful, patient, respectful approaches creates a safe space for co-imagining new futures, how words can be windows or walls. And what we're looking for is to create windows into new realities. So it's been a really exciting and really rewarding conversation. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I need to tell you about a few upcoming activities. There is a new brochure for Erasmus Plus. And this tells you more about the new generation of Erasmus Plus, which is a broader range of activities under that program that was launched in 2021. And there are plenty of exciting new features, including mobility opportunities for adult learners and staff, permanent accreditation for adult education providers and other organizations. So we're going to be putting a link to the Erasmus Plus brochure on the EPALE platform. Please download it and look at it, because you're going to find out more about upcoming calls to proposals where you can participate and get access to funds. We've also have a survey. We've got 120,000 people on the EPALE platform, which we're grateful for, and we'd like to get even more, but we want to understand, how do you use it? How useful is it? What other features do you want? What is it that you'd like to engage with? So we have a survey that's open at the moment only in English, but it will be in other EPALE languages in the coming days. That is open until the 15th of November. So there's your opportunity to tell us how you want to see the EPALE platform grow and evolve. And of course, there'll be a few specific questions about this conference, so we can find out from you what you found useful about the conference. We also would like to encourage you to share your stories. Some of the people who were on the panel yesterday and today are people whose amazing stories we found out about. We were able to feature them here because they submitted them to a community story. And we've got 50 of them already submitted, people who've shared their stories. And our particular focus at the moment is, what motivated you to be an adult educator? What was your own experience of education, and what brought you to this point where you are opening doors for others and creating opportunity through adult education? I hope you'll agree that listening to some of our speakers yesterday and today has been really inspirational. You can see the passion and commitment they bring to adult learning, and that could be you next. We want you to share your community stories. And in a moment, I'm going to show you a fantastic video that explains to you about the community stories and what you can do. But I just want to remind you that tomorrow we start our plenary, which begins at 10 a.m. And immediately after this closes, there will be a workshop on aligning skills and motivation for human-centered learning. And in order to participate in the workshop, you needed to be registered via the EPALE website. So now let's watch the videos for the community stories. Thank you, and I will see you tomorrow.
Remember, you were a child, went to school, entered a new building, and met your new classmates and teachers. You were worried about failure, about not knowing enough, and were afraid of rejection. You played schoolyard games, laughed, made friends, became more confident, and succeeded. Our life experiences, the ups, downs, and everything between, shape us. As we grow and experience new things, we change. What is your earliest memory of learning? Who was there with you to make that moment enjoyable? And now, why did you choose to keep developing knowledge and skills? And when did you choose to support adults in their personal and professional growth? EPALE would like to know your story. Be part of a human archive of living voices of educators from all over Europe. Help us explore the adult learning community. What motivates you? What makes you feel accomplished at the end of the day? What makes you feel good about yourself as an adult learning professional? And how has education changed your life? Share your story now on EPALE.